This is the second set of materials that I'll go through today, planning for tomorrow. This one is a little more formal. It has fewer slides. It only has 26 slides, but several of them have conversations that go around it. It is a presentation that has adapted over a few years, but part of this is something that was presented around 12 years ago, give or take almost to the day, in Hawaii. So my wife and I got married on September the 2nd, and I said to her, you know, we have a couple of options. We could go and do a honeymoon and figure something out, or you could come with me to a conference that I have to present at, and we could do that as our honeymoon. And she says, yeah. And I said, well, bear with me. If we both present at the conference, we get to travel for free because the hotel is covered and our flights are covered. She says, yeah. I said, and the person who's running the conference is Jack Molisani. She said, so? Because she had no idea who Jack is. I said, well, he's running this conference called LavaCon. She says, still not interested. I said, it's in Hawaii. She says, so what are we proposing to speak on? And Jack runs an awesome conference for those who have gone to LavaCon. So shout out to Jack. He runs a conference around content, but also around management, best practices. And years ago, he gave us the opportunity to present a little bit on project management and technical communications. And it has developed into a much more rich presentation since then. But a lot of the ideas that are in here exist because Jack gave us support early on and because my wife is in this field and has done work with it. So a thanks to them, specifically a thank you on this side. Again, to the volunteers that are here, to Bob for having initiated conversations at STC in Florida, and to the Adobe Technical Communications team, but also to the STAR group. They do translation, software localization, they do authoring and transcreation, as well as digital transformation in the area, and they sponsored the breakfast and the snacks that we're having. So big shout out and thank you to them as well. And again, I didn't put Jack Molisani and LavaCon on here, but thanks to him as well for having had faith in us early on when we were starting to do presentations together and letting my wife and I present. The outline, writers are involved in project management, even if you don't specifically know it. Regardless of what it is, we are going to work with all kinds of things. Scope, schedule, budget. Is this a schedule or a schedule area? It's a schedule area, right? Yes. Yep. Risk, stakeholder management. We can leverage some of the best practices that people in project management have when it comes to technical communications. And in doing so, first off, you win over the project management people in your organization. And like tech comm people, project management people span across the silos inside an organization. Whatever it is that research and development is doing, whatever it is that legal is doing, whatever marketing is doing, they are involved with tech comm and they are involved largely with PM work. So what they do helps us, what we do helps them, and it's just a matter of both sides communicating with each other and getting into a pattern of working together. They do have 10 different knowledge areas that I'll talk about. We'll go through, we'll talk about what each of those core areas means for technical communications and talk about how better documentation can come through better management of the work that we do. I am personally not great at running the project side of things. I can do it. I just don't like doing it as much because it has a lot of detailed work. So having people who have a specific skill set, as I mentioned in the previous presentation, is fantastic. And you will find that if you start your own business, if you are in a business, having a project manager on a team is similar to having a technical communicator on the team. It adds value, but at first people don't necessarily see that value. And so we'll go through and I'll talk about some of the areas where you can show value when you return to work. Because the hope is you come out of this and you go back and you say, if I do this, this, and this, here's how I can be more successful in what I do. And I'll use a couple of concrete examples from things my wife has done. Again, same slide as last time around. So I'm just going to skip past that one. And I'm still me.
That's good.
Yeah, give or take. I mean, I'm a different person than I was 15 minutes ago, but not dramatically different. So there's 10 knowledge areas. These are ordered based on the PMBOK guide, the project management body of knowledge. The guide is an excellent resource, even if you are not an active member of the program management side of things or project management side of things. Things that lead to project success, and I'm not going to read all 10 because subsequent slides address each of these, and I have some discussions around them that I'll go over as well. Again, jot down the slide number if it's valuable to you, and you can go back through the video later and skip ahead. If you know that there's something about slide 15 that's really useful, jot down 15. Don't worry about capturing everything that's on the slide. You can replay the video and jump to that moment. There's a thing that the PMI, the Project Management Institute, which is similar to STC. So they have the pulse of the profession. It's a global survey of projects, program and portfolio managers, and it charts major trends in the project management side of things. There is a link there. If you have your cell phone and you pause the video and you just scan that with your camera, that QR code should jump you to it. If you want to follow the link, you should be able to copy paste that or type it in yourself. And you can see that it is a 2018 document. So this is a very current document that I reference back to. They talk about what generates success when it comes to projects and what it looks like. And it would be awesome if technical communications was seen in this same area. Champion organizations, so the best of the companies. They see 80% or more of the projects delivered on time, on budget, and meeting business intents by managing the time and resources well. For example, in Switzerland, they built a massive tunnel that connected one side of a mountain with the other side of a mountain. They dug a tunnel through it. They started on opposite ends, and when they got towards the middle of it, they called in all of the press in order to have them there. And on one side, all of the press, everybody, the engineering company, the president of the country, everyone's standing around, and on the other side, fingers crossed, is a machine that's about to bore through the last couple of feet and bring down that piece in between. This project was completed on time. It was completed on budget. There was, I believe, 1, maybe 2 deaths over the 20 or so years that they were doing this. Considering how large this was and how dangerous it was to drill through a mountain. Now everybody's gathered and the machine fires up on the other side. You can hear a rumble. It comes through the wall and they're misaligned, the 2 sides of the tunnel, by about an inch. It was that close, over something like 60 miles that they dug the tunnel, and they apologized. Because, I mean, the Swiss are about precision.
Right.
And they were off by, 2.5 centimeters. They were off by an inch, over 60 miles, over 100 kilometers. Boston also did a major construction project, and that came in dramatically over budget in time, in materials, in all kinds of things. And there's all kinds of different reasons that go into this. But given the option, if you had to run some type of a major undertaking, do you want the company that, even if they project that it's a higher cost or that it will take longer, stands by their projection and is accurate and has a history of it? Or do you want to be involved with something where they say, we can do it for less, but they have a history of delivering over budget and taking longer than expected? In most cases, I would argue that you're better off to pay a little more, or in some cases, even a lot more, in order to have success. I can tell you that if I have a lawyer who is defending me against a criminal charge that is going to result in me going to jail for 20 years, I want the one with the success ratio, not the one that costs 50% less. If I have to have a heart transplant, I want the surgeon who has a 99.5% success ratio, and that other 0.5 is because people who went in weren't in proper physical medical shape in order to have the transplant surgery done, and they did the best that they could anyway. If it comes to documentation, I want the team that says, yeah, we're going to be able to meet the delivery deadlines that you have for the product so that we can get this out the door to the client. So these organizations, these champion organizations, they continue to mature the project talent, the capabilities, and the culture. They build internally. They develop and support their people. They have a higher success rate, 92% success versus 32% for the underperformers. They have a more successful business outcome, so their company is more profitable, and they waste significantly less money due to poor project performance. So they may still have money that's lost, but it's not because of the project itself. It's because of other factors that are outside of their control. There is no one factor, though, that drives success. And smart organizations generally know that proven best practices are going to lead to greater success and have far less waste. So in technical communication, I suggest we borrow what they are doing and take the best practices they have and apply it in our environments. I won't hit every single graph and I won't hit each of them in the exact same amount of detail, but this one here is straight out of their material, the value delivery capability maturity leading to greater project performance. The important things are if they have a higher maturity or a lower maturity. So are they an organization that is showing effective project management or not? If they are, then on average, they are far more successful in completing things on time, within budget, meeting business goals. They are less likely to have project creep for scope. They're less likely to have the project itself deemed a failure. And they are less likely to lose money if the project fails. Again, if we can take advantage of this in TechComm, we can go in and say, if we do documentation and we use best practices, we'll meet budget, we'll meet timing, and we'll make sure that you get what you expect. We won't have to create more stuff on the fly because all of a sudden there's new content being demanded. We're not going to run into a situation where even if the project itself fails, we're not going to be involved in that as often. There will be project failures, of course, but we're going to mitigate that. And if it turns out that the project does fail, we're not going to lose nearly as much money because we've properly allocated and planned for our resources. There's phrases in the report if you read through it, and I've tried to pull out a couple of pieces, and I'm not reading every single quote in its entirety, but you can see in the first column, success is because the vision is communicated effectively. So the word communication. Directors, executive leaders, they find it's important to expand the role to include being a communicator. And a communicator in project management is considered to be always clear and concise, no matter the audience. They also are finding that they leverage improved communication or interaction between the organization and the customers. Talk to the customers, talk within your teams. Not only talk, write back and forth. Communicate with each other in every way, shape, and form. And again, we in the technical communication side of things are about communicating in every shape and form. Other phrases, champions, the best organizations, digital transformations, the ability to learn, understand, apply, and keep up with technology, communication skills mattering. Second column, 4 out of 5. Soft skills, communications, leadership are more important today than 5 years ago. They also influence in the organization by communicating the alignment to the corporate strategy, getting rid of roadblocks. Communication, communication, communication. We're in technical communication. Finally, an organization should understand the link between project and strategy, including emphasizing communication and knowledge transfer. As a matter of fact, in the graph that you see here, a project started in the past year that were failures. Why? And if you look at the numbers, 39, 37, 35, those are pretty close, and then 2 of them at 29. So you can look at this and say, well, it's tied for 4th. You could say it's really sort of the second main grouping. But in here, what is the cause of failure? Inadequate or poor communication. We communicate across teams. We often have the opportunity to see a problem develop or identify a potential solution because we have a conversation with one team, and then later in the afternoon, we work with another team. You might be working with, for argument's sake, somebody who's creating hardware in the morning and somebody who's creating the software for that hardware in the afternoon. And in the morning, the hardware people are saying, well, we can't get it to properly install when we try to set up a virtual environment to test it. And in the afternoon, the software people say, well, the hardware wasn't able to successfully do an install when we tried to put it in using the default virtual machine software, but when we used this software, it worked. The next day you go back to hardware and you say, well, what about using that software instead? So, well, we can try it. And they come back and they think you're a genius. How did you do that? Well, I'm a technical communicator. It's what I do. And then you sip your martini. Or it's just because you have the communication across teams. Probably a bit of both. Enjoy your martini. So the 10 knowledge areas, as defined by the Project Management Institute, the PMI, which is to project management, similar to what STC is to technical communications, and what your job should be able to do so that you can achieve success. So what is it that you do? Integration management. This is about effectively integrating the processes among all the other knowledge areas. So there's 10 different knowledge areas, and one of them is tie them all together. You don't have to be scared or overwhelmed at this. We do it all the time. We have to figure out what we're going to be doing. We have to plan this. We have to then actively do it. And we have to manage others who are doing it. We have to monitor and control what we're doing and then deliver the documentation at the end of the day. To make it happen, we're pulling all of the different pieces together. We work with all of these different teams. So we are already working with integration management, deciding where we're going to put our own personal or team resources, dealing with issues that come up. The good news is you're doing a lot of this unconsciously already, and the key is to become conscious of it so that you're not missing any of the key pieces. Make it part of your own workflow. If we're not conscious of the management of what we're doing in documentation, we end up potentially skipping steps and compromising quality, falling victim to things like scope creep, getting ambushed because there's an out-of-the-loop stakeholder who suddenly shows up and says, what about this piece for documentation? We miss due dates or we risk a complete project failure. So there's no one way that you can manage a project, but all of them should be considered in every single one of the areas, even if it's only by saying it doesn't apply. So when you see what these 10 areas are, there might be one or two of them where you say, that doesn't apply to me. Good. Track that it does not apply. And when you talk to the project management people in your organization and they say, what about this or that? You can say, doesn't apply to us. Or they can give you more insight. You can say, yeah, okay, that applies here. And I should remember moving forward, because it turns out, for argument's sakes, that I said there's no real stakeholder management. We don't have any external stakeholders. They're only in the business. Well, what about our third-party partners? Oh, yeah, totally forgot about that. Your job then is to pull together the activities from all the other knowledge areas that follow and make the project a success. So the first thing to do is realize that everything that follows is connected. Very Dirk Gently, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, et cetera, et cetera. Everything is connected. Scope management, primarily concerned with defining and controlling what is and is not included in. I've got an awesome little story on scope management for you in regards to something that my wife did. It's not in my notes, but I'm going to mention it. Make sure there's a plan for the work to be done and what's going to be produced for deliverables. Plan is we're going to create this content. We're going to deliver it as PDF and a mobile app and a website. That's what we're doing. If you can't clearly define the requirements and you're running into issues with filling in your share of the project, then you start running into the problem of missing the entire point of it. You open yourself up to scope creep, you have dissatisfied customer stakeholders, and you end up missing the schedule. An informal sort of laws of project management. And if you want to write down a neat little quote, if content, so the stuff we do, if content is allowed to change freely, the rate of change will exceed the rate of progress.
Say that again.
If content is allowed to change freely, the rate of change will exceed the rate of progress. So if people are constantly able to come back and change it, you're never going to be able to move ahead because it's constantly changing. You cannot have a moving target and successfully achieve it without a massive amount of additional thought. And if the change that's happening is predictable, then you can plan for it. Consider this. We know mathematically what the orbit of Mars is in relation to the Earth. So yes, the target that you fire at from Earth is always changing, but we know mathematically and scientifically where that target is going to be by the time a vehicle gets to Mars. We know where it will be in a year or 2 years. Therefore, SpaceX is predicting that they will be able to send a vehicle to Mars with people on board. The place they're sending it, if you take a snapshot in space at the moment it launches, is void of Mars. But by the time the two pieces line up, these will connect the way they are supposed to. So you know what the target is for a project. You know what the deadlines are. You know what the resources are. And once that's locked down and you know what the destination is, how you get there is what project management does. hypothetically, let's say Cleveland had a football team that had a quarterback that got injured. And say they were losing at that time. If they had a backup who could come in and successfully identify, this is where I need to put the ball while everyone is running so that we can achieve more points, Cleveland could win a game. I showed up the day they won. If content is allowed to change freely, the rate of change will exceed the rate of progress, I believe led to the Cleveland victory, knowing that I was going to be here. So nail down your content and deliverables. Otherwise, other people will define it for you. Your job, make sure that your project includes all the work required, and that's it. And then you can complete the project successfully. So the story from my wife, this is awesome. She worked with a bunch of different people at a company that was then acquired by IBM. And early on, when we first talked about this presentation at Labicon, she said, I've had people who are product managers. I've had people who are sales and marketing and VPs and others in meetings. And everybody wants their target met in regards to documentation and what we're going to write. So what she would do is outline all the stuff that had to be created, map it across a calendar, and say, this is what we need to do so that when we go to editing, so that when we go to publishing, so that when we go to translation, so that we go to translated publishing, we can achieve the delivery of this date for North America, this date for global. Here's all the moving parts. And then she had everyone sign off on this. So now, everyone that's involved has signed off on this big paper that she has, which just had a chart of all the things that have to be done. And inevitably, early on, one of the managers would come along, and Bob's the manager, and shows up and says, hey, Vivian, you forgot about this thing. She'd say, I can't believe that I forgot about that. I mean, I forgot about it, Bob. Wow, what a horrible thing for me to forget about. How could I possibly have forgotten it? You say, oh, well, we didn't give you that information. Okay, I didn't forget. Yeah. You didn't give me that. Yeah, but it's really important and we have to have it in there. No problem, she says. She opens up the chart that you've initialed and signed off on. And she says, if you look on here, you'll see all the things that are in yellow. All of the yellow stuff, that's your team. That's what we're delivering. Now, I've taken what you said is missing and I've identified that it is going to add exactly 3 months of effort into the overall scope, which is a year long. All you need to do is pick which 3 months worth of other stuff we remove, and I'll slot that right in. And of course you say, well, we can't. You got to have all that stuff in there. And she says, no problem. Totally get it. Got to have it all in there, plus this extra work. So Bob, what I need you to do is get me resources, dollars, so that I can hire other people or bring them in from elsewhere in the organization and take them off what they're working on, slot them in, and get those extra 3 months worth. And I figure the cost on that is about $100,000 a month for all the different resources we need. You need to get me $300,000 in budget. You go, I can't do that. She says, don't worry about it. I got you covered. This is where we started. This is where we are. This is where we end. All you need to do is go to the client and tell them that end date needs to extend 3 months. I'm giving you all kinds of options here. You go, I can't go to the client and say that. And she says, well, you know what you could do? Before you sign off on it, you could tell me what you actually need. So that when you sign this and you said, this is what we have to do, and then she'll say things like this, and this is where you win the points back. She'll say, let me help you out. There are several things you've identified that we need to do, and I agree, it's about 1.5 months of effort. We've got another 1.5 months we can't do. So we're going to take about 50% of what you need, but we're not going to go through and edit. We're not going to go through and translate it. We're going to create the content. We're going to take some of the time that we have in there for scope creep that I've already planned for and put into the calendar, and we're going to allocate it to your team. Now we can get half of what you need, and we can get it up to the point where it's acceptable for first release. And then the next 1.5 months, we're going to take as release notes. We're going to add additional information. And on all of the English content, we're going to have something that says translation will be available with our next product release. And we'll factor that in. And next time around, we will scope more accurately what you're looking for. And at that point, you can go back and you can say to your group, hey, we managed to get in core stuff and you look good. She can go back and say, we had to extend, but we already planned for some of that. She looks good. And the next time it rolls around, she can say, hey, look, we discovered a couple of things that Bob's team was putting together, and it turns out that none of the other teams even thought about this stuff. We need this in the next release. Otherwise, our clients won't be happy. Thank you, Bob, for discovering this without that discovery. So now she comes back to you, and it goes from, well, what do you mean I didn't do it? What do you mean you didn't do it? It goes into, hey, as an organization, we can benefit from this moving forward, and we can talk to our customers and say, look, here's what we're doing in order to be proactive. So there's some really neat stuff that you can do in scope management that makes you look like the hero. And part of it is get it in writing. If you're doing your own business, same thing, get it in writing. Time and schedule management, accomplishing things timely in regards to completion. Again, from the laws of project management, a carelessly planned project will take 3 times longer to complete than expect. A carefully planned project will only take twice as long.
That's a good.
Yeah. If you budget for things, historically, if you can go back and you can say, where were we far more accurate? Great. If it turns out that Kim's team historically has always needed an extra 20%, then I can turn around and I can say, okay, I know that that team needs 20% more time, and therefore I will plan. And in the future, everyone looks at it and says everything was delivered on time. And the reason Kim's team took longer is because the ongoing dependency on scope creep was impacting the documentation team. There were always new things. Well, now I've worked with Bob to make sure we don't have scope creep. I've worked with Kim in order to make sure that when it's resolved, her 20% longer becomes maybe only 10% longer, and that actually becomes the new norm. So therefore, it is the right amount of time. And within the organization, in the subsequent estimating and the subsequent time and scheduling, we can have far more accurate information. So you want to track these over time. You could decide to divide this into 5 areas as well. Defining the activities that you need to complete the project. So what is it that we need to do? Putting them in order. Now that we know all the things we have to do, what's the order that they have to be done in? For example, you can't proofread a document if it has not yet been created. Figuring out who's available to work on the project based on the required skill level and ability. Do we need an engineer to review the translation? Does that engineer have to be fluent in Japanese? Or can we get somebody who's a native Japanese speaker to review it, even if that person is not an engineer? Estimate how many work periods, hours, days, weeks, whatever, to complete all the activities. And lastly, put together a schedule, with the milestones and the handover dates, and then keep that under control. So define the activities, put them in order, find the resources, estimate how long, and put together a schedule. And based on that, it means your job is to identify the activity, sequence, estimate time, and schedule. Those 5 are the summation of what you should be doing in TechComm when it comes to time and schedule management. Cost management. Making sure that it's completed within the approved budget. Different stakeholders measure product costs in different ways. You have to consider the information requirements of your stakeholders. Some of them might consider the cost in dollars, some of them the cost in number of people, some of them the cost in days or in delay or in risk, and what is the cost to us if it doesn't work. Cost estimates and budgeting are tightly linked on a lot of smaller projects. So think about life cycle as well. What is the effect of the project decision on the cost of using, maintaining, and supporting it over the resulting time of the project? So if you limit the number of design reviews you do, you're going to reduce the exposure to the cost of the project increasing, but it may increase the customer's operating cost because there's things you didn't test for. You've got to balance those. What is the risk versus the reward when it comes to managing costs? Oh, look, if we don't translate it to any other languages, our translation budget is 0. Yeah, but our 2 biggest markets are Germany and Japan. Outside of the US, Germany is 25% of our sales. Japan is 20% of our sales. The United States is 55% of our sales. Are you willing to take almost a 50% cut in sales because you don't bother translating so that you can save $250,000? That balance is an interesting one when it comes to cost management. Oh, it won't cost us anything if we don't translate. Yeah, but we won't sell to the Japanese or the German. So estimate how much the resources are. Budget it across the different activities, the work packages that are going to be delivered. Influence the factors that can create cost variances and budget changes as well, such as scope creep. If you can control the change in the size of the project, you get your costs under control. If you know, for example, you're working with FrameMaker 2017 right now, we opened up one of the files, and I'm making up the number, but give or take, it may have taken a minute to open one of the files. I popped open the same file in Frame 2019, and it took 2 seconds.
Right.
The 64-bit architecture that is now in Frame 2019 has a dramatic improvement. We're doing some work for a company that's doing automotive owner's manuals, and if the number that I was told was if one of the assembly lines stops producing vehicles, and it stopped because a critical component is missing. Critical component, vehicle rolls off, it does not have wheels, it does not have brakes, it does not have an engine, it does not have a steering wheel, it doesn't have a windshield. Those are critical components. Critical component that shuts down the assembly line, it does not have owner's manual. If you don't have the documentation, it shuts down automotive assembly lines. Take a guess. Dollars per minute for one assembly line that they lose when they have to shut down. Anyone want to hazard a guess?
1 million.
In 1 minute, one line, not the entire, $88,000 a minute.
A minute.
A minute. Not per hour, not per day. 88 grand a minute if they don't have the documentation. So the risk is really high. The cost on the customer side is very high if the client that I'm working with cannot deliver manuals on time, and they are legally responsible for those costs. They need to be able to manage these things. And if they turn around and they say, well, we're not going to worry about necessarily doing translation for foreign markets, then great, North America's on its way, and they've cut their cost by not having to build templates for foreign markets, by not translating, but it's an international car company. It's a top 10 car company. They need to have the documentation in every language. Quality management, this is a great one. Concerned with a project satisfying the needs for which it was undertaken. Definition of quality, the degree to which a set of inherent characteristics fulfill the requirements. Did you do what you said you would do? Have you fulfilled all of the stated requirements? So what are the specifications? What's the time involved? What's the cost? What's the value? These can all be defined, measured, and then later discussed. Question. Does McDonald's deliver a quality cheeseburger? Just show of hands. Who thinks McDonald's has a quality cheeseburger? No hands, really. Based on quality, well, let's do this. Based on how long it takes you to get the cheeseburger when you order it, based on what you get for the cost, so therefore the value, are you getting exactly what you expect at any McDonald's when you order a cheeseburger?
Oh,
Then yes.
Then yes.
cheesy card.
Yep. Cheesy cardboard. Quality doesn't have to do with the goodness or the wholesomeness. It's everything to do with what you said you would deliver. If McDonald's says they're going to create a cheeseburger that meets a certain specification consistently, and they do, then quality is delivered. It may not be to a certain grade. It might not be that you're looking at something that is your favorite burger, but it is a consistent delivery of exactly what you expect. The low grade might not be provided if that was the intended goal. If you wanted to go to a place in order to get a really high quality, delicious burger that is as healthy and wholesome as possible, you might want to skip a fast food joint. The Big Mac is higher quality. You know that on a Big Mac, you get 2 all beef patty specials, right? Everybody knows. And if you go McDonald's to McDonald's, I can almost guarantee you go to any McDonald's, and the sesame seed bun, there's an even distribution, and give or take maybe 1 or 2%, you're going to get the same number of sesame seeds. That's the type of thing they're looking for. The amount of ketchup that goes onto a burger is the same ketchup at every McDonald's because it comes out of something that cuts off the amount of ketchup. If I go to a Harvey's, if I go to a Burger King, I run the possibility that at some locations I get more mayo or more ketchup because it's coming out of a squeeze bottle. That also makes it tougher to control costs. If McDonald's decides to do an experiment one day and they go through and they say, let's take every single ketchup dose that we dollop out and cut it back by 2%. And then we'll do surveys after a week of doing this, and we'll start asking people, what do you think of the amount of ketchup? Is that good? And if everybody says yes, McDonald's can keep the perception of getting the exact same thing, roll it out internationally, and cut their ketchup costs. And that can result in an organization that size, that can result in millions of dollars per year in additional profit. So in your environment, what do you need to do? Identify the quality standards that are relevant to a project, apply them, and monitor the results for compliance. Make sure that you promise something and you deliver it. I would almost rather have a new hire straight out of school who is an average B+ student across the board than I would someone who consistently gets an A+ or a D. Because with the B+, I can say I have a baseline. I know that everything's done to this level, and if I can make minor improvements, I can move that person up. If anyone's a hockey fan, even if you're not a hockey fan, who heard about Vegas last year making it to the Stanley Cup final? Vegas, brand new team, put together of all of the players that no other team wanted. What most people don't know, the guy who was the key architect behind this, their general manager, who built the team and helped pick all of the players, the team that let him go the previous year, the team that he built, 18 out of 24 players that were involved in the Stanley Cup chase, was the Washington Capitals, which won the Stanley Cup. So the two teams that faced each other were teams he built for all practical purposes. And with Vegas and with Washington, people know potentially, even if you don't know hockey all that much, people know the name of Ovechkin. He's their superstar player. It's like people who don't know hockey in this area, you've probably heard Sidney Crosby from Pittsburgh. Vegas didn't have any one player that necessarily was that name brand, but every single player was good enough to be just a level below that. So they had a consistent product across the board, and other teams could put out their best, but then when they put out their second best, they were equal. And when they put out their third and their fourth lines, Vegas was a bit better. And it paid off by taking a team that no one expected to have any success to pretty much winning the Stanley Cup, to coming that close. So identify the quality standards. They needed consistent delivery from players. You need a consistent burger from a McDonald's, and you need a consistent quality level to documentation within an organization. And the bigger the organization, the more consistent that needs to be. We work with a client in the mining industry. Their health and safety standards globally are set to every nation's highest requirement. And it means that in many countries, they overtrain for the safety that's required, but they can pick up people from anywhere on earth and drop them in any other site on earth, and they know that they will meet those national requirements when it comes to doing work. It costs them more in the short term, but it becomes far more profitable long term if they have to quickly scale up or ramp down in different locations and move people. HR management. Organizing and managing the team. If you've been a team leader, you've worked on documentation projects with other writers, these activities should be pretty familiar. If you haven't had to do them themselves, somebody else has. And it could be you the next time around. Even lone writers have had to submit the number of person hours, estimate how long it takes to complete a project, come up with ways to reduce the duration if they add another person to the team. What if there's more work that's required? So at the beginning of every project, make it clear if it isn't already, who do you report to? Or if you're in charge of collecting the status of everyone else, who is the project manager, who reports to you? If you're a senior writer, you've likely had to mentor others, so you've had to do training or at least ramp them up. So there are all kinds of different things that come into play when it's HR related. Communications. This is our core area, right? Communication management. Stakeholder, in regards to this, is basically anyone whose interests are going to be involved in the project. So people can make or break, and you need to make sure that you can communicate with these people properly. You need to manage the expectations that are inside here, and a lot of the communications is playing around the idea of saying this is what we're going to deliver, communicating it to the stakeholder, whether that's the printing company you're dealing with, whether it's the senior VP who is in charge of the overall project, whether it's the writers or the translators. There's some stuff that at first may seem minor, if you're doing work here in North America and you say to somebody, I need the content translated to French and to Spanish, it seems pretty straightforward. And Spanish largely is a pretty straightforward translation internationally. Spanish is largely Spanish. French is not French, just like English is not English. If you translate from one language to English and you say, park the lorry near the flat, that makes very little sense to a lot of people in North America, but it makes a great deal of sense to people in England. If you say you can find that in the trunk, we understand where in the vehicle you can open up and find the spare tire, whereas in England, they need to be told that it's in the boot. So that type of communications can become important, and you don't even necessarily think about it, but where is it that ultimately all of the information goes, and how does it get there? So effective communication management's also going to mean that people are not surprised with what they get at the end. Change requests will likely be reduced because you have conversations and discussions. Quality complaints are reduced because you've established the baseline. Calls for overtime are reduced because people know earlier that there is more work or less work, and potentially somebody could come along and say, you know what, we have a group of writers, and we have a group of illustrators, and we have a group of editors. And it turns out that the editing is going much more smoothly than expected because the quality of writing is higher. And we have 2 or 3 editors that might be able to help out with the graphics team, not necessarily creating all of the images, but double checking all of the image captions for consistency. And now we know that the illustrators, who are constantly striving to achieve all of the illustrations in an appropriate amount of time, run into problems because they have to keep referring to a style guide. The editors know that. Maybe we take one of the editors and we make that editor available for a week or so in order to do a little bit of on-the-job training and make it easier for our illustrators to meet their targets. Without having the conversation, you can't do that. So manage the client's expectations. You need to know who the stakeholders are, what they need. You have to distribute the required information to these people, have reports on regular status, performance, and resolve any issues that exist. At the core of the success is our ability to influence the people and to communicate with them. Risk management. Primarily concerned with risks being identified, analyzed, with responding to risk, monitoring, and controlling it. Bob, you did an awesome job on risk management in regards to some of the things we were looking at, both at Rockwell and here. We got together the day before at Rockwell. We identified a couple of problems that we were running into. We had a team there doing a recording. We needed to go in. We had to test the wireless, which at first didn't work because I didn't have a password. So you had to track that down. All of these were potential risks. We did a trial run. We came here into this room yesterday, set things up, double checked. Trisha, you brought along a good quality microphone, one that I don't have on my laptop, so that we get a better audio recording. All of those things are related to risk management, making sure that there's better value at the end of the day. Another humorous laws of project management. Murphy is alive and well in your projects. Risk definition then. Project risk is an uncertain event or a condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or a negative effect on at least one objective. If the risk even occurs, the schedule, the cost, the scope, the quality, all of those could be affected. The early space missions, huge risk of a vehicle exploding on re-entry. We had that happen with the space shuttle. Exploding at launch. We've had that happen with rockets. SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, one of their rockets exploded on the ground as it was trying to take off. Those are all risks, and there are certain risks that are far more serious in consequence. Another risk right now for me is that, I walk across the room and I stub my toe on something. It's a minimal risk, but it's a risk. So how do I avoid that? I make sure that there's no obstacles in the way. I keep a good eye on where I'm walking. The consequence of that risk going horribly wrong, I stub my toe. The risk going horribly wrong on a mission to Mars, everyone dies. Not only that, but everyone who's on board dies, and it reduces the likelihood of the next mission being able to be launched as quickly as possible. It will still go. Our risks fall somewhere in between those things. So the goal is to manage the risk in a way that you decrease the likelihood of a negative impact. whatever that might be. We did a drug submission with a client, and one of the risks that the owner had, it was about $1 million a day that they were spending for 3 years. So about $1 billion on the line. Yep, their competition was around the corner. One of the risks was, what if people who are going home after a long day get into a car accident? What if people who are working a long day have to go home, they come back the next day, they're tired, they don't work as well? What if our competition finds out that we're getting close and we're burning the midnight oil in order to get things done? So a few things that they did. When we got into the last month or so, and the competition was less than 5 miles away, we would drive past their offices, they would drive past ours. They put tinfoil over all of the windows so that no light went in and out. So now the competition didn't know if we were working because they couldn't see the lights on inside. But the competition would see the cars in the parking lot. So they talked to a nearby hotel that was about a 5-minute walk, and they rented out their parking level. And everybody parked there at night. So the parking lot looked empty. And they knew that people were tired, so they booked a couple floors of the rooms 24 hours a day. And I would show up, I'd put in 24 hours straight. I'm exhausted. I go over to the hotel, I walk in, it's 3 PM. I said, I need a room. Like, yeah, no problem, there's a room ready. An hour and a half later, somebody else shows up and says, I need a room. They say, there's a room ready. Well, after 6 hours, 8 hours of sleeping, I get up, it's 11:30 at night. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go. I leave. They had the hotel staff clean the room. And an hour later, somebody else from the office came over and said, I'm tired, I need a room. They said, yeah, we got one. And they had the room that I was just in. So we had 24 hours a day, the hotel rooms were being used. And they just cycled through, and the hotel still had its normal rooms. The competition got their drug submission in on a Thursday. We got our drug submission in on the Monday before that. With all things being equal, first one in wins. After 3 years of $1 million a day, the risk came down to people. They effectively managed it. We got our drug submission in first. The drug was worth somewhere around, I believe, $7 billion a year in sales. The competition bought the company that I worked for. That was how they resolved it. Early risk management, let's see if we can beat them to market because it's cheaper. If we can't, we'll mitigate the costs of all of our R&D by also making sure we set aside money so that we can make them an insanely high takeover offer right away if they win. They did, they acquired the technology. So some really interesting stuff can happen, and risk is going to be there. You can also use risk to increase the likelihood of positive impacts, like finishing early, cutting costs, maintaining quality. It's present everywhere, even ones you feel confident about. You could have a project that has a track record that's awesome with a good team of people. It's small, it's well managed, but there's still risk. What if one of those really good people that you depend on leaves? What if that person goes on paternity leave? What if that person goes on maternity leave? What if that individual has a partner who's transferred to another organization and they leave and they travel elsewhere? So not talking about the risks, not addressing it is sort of like not looking both ways just because you've always crossed the road and you've never been hit by a car yet. Project risk always exists. You're going to see it more if things are scoped poorly, if targets aren't well planned or well communicated, if the skill level of people working on a project are inadequate. Performance targets are difficult. The environment is complex. A lot of that stuff is familiar to technical communicators. Everything we do is inherently risky. We run into those things all the time. You've got to go out, you've got to learn this new product, you've got to learn this new software, you have to talk to these new stakeholders. We have a new client. We have demands that are being made from our new senior executive vice president of product, or whatever it is in your organization that senior person is called. So decrease the probability and the impact of negative events. So make sure stakeholders don't just show up at the end of it saying, hey, why didn't you include this? We documented, you told me to include all of this, I did. Yeah, but what about this new piece? You never signed off on that new piece. Why are you showing up with it now? Also increase those positive ones. So you can't just guess what's going to go wrong. You have to analyze what the impact is. There is a possibility, for example, that if you're in California and the ground starts to shake, that it could trigger the risk of a building collapse. And it's a much higher impact of that happening, or a likelihood, than here in Cleveland. I just found out we're in Ottawa next week for a session that we're doing with Adobe on Thursday. Ottawa got hit with a tornado yesterday. not in the area that we are directly in, but it got hit by some pretty severe tornadoes. A couple people got it on video. It's not a risk that realistically I check every single day. But yesterday, when I saw that there were heavy winds headed that way, I thought, if there is something up in the area, I wonder where it's going to impact. Procurement. Procurement management, concerned with purchasing, acquiring what you need. So this includes administrating contracts, purchase orders. A lot of senior writers, team leads, documentation managers have to look after this stuff on a regular basis. Hiring and interviewing contractors, arranging for training, buying software, hardware. In a small business, you may also be involved in making sure you actually get what you paid for, that things are delivered based on the specifications that you've set. Knowing that the original requirements have been fulfilled, that you got what you were promised, that all of the tools and all of the training has been to the standard that you expect, to the quality level. And as you look after this and you plan it and you monitor, you also need to report it back. And this goes back to the very first point about integrating all of this. So procurement management might be related to risk management, might be related to cost, might be related to stakeholder. You need to tie all of these pieces together when it comes to the documentation world. Stakeholder management. This is the clear communication side. This goes back to some of the earlier slides that I talked about. The value in clear communication with stakeholders cannot be oversold. The most current PMI pulse of the profession found that stakeholder management and support is priceless in regards to successful projects. Actively engaging the executive sponsor means that organizations can bridge any communication gaps that exist between the people who can influence and draw in the resources that you need, so that the implementation for the success is going to be far higher. You want to be part of successful projects. You need to make sure that you're working with people, that you're communicating with people. This means supporting, boosting success, reducing risk. They've done analysis to show the dominant driver of a project meeting the original goal is an actively engaged senior sponsor. If you are involved with the people who can make the decisions, your odds of success within what's happening are higher. Organizations that have a higher percentage of projects with actively engaged sponsors have 40% more success, whereas those with a lower percentage have greater failure. 1 in 4 organizations, 26% technically, report inadequate sponsor support is the main reason they fail. Yeah. The divide between the underperformers and the champions is almost 2.5 times. 41% of underperformers say inadequate sponsor support is a primary cause. 17% of the champions say that inadequate support causes problems. Simply making that conversation happen increases success. Keeping the communication lines open with anyone who has a vested interest in what you're doing leads to greater success. And if it is going to fail, you know about it sooner, and you can start to manage the risk. I don't mind being involved with clients. I like being involved with clients where it succeeds, but I don't mind being involved where there's a failure. If the failure is not due to something that we did, if it's outside, if the competition beats them to the market, there's nothing we can do about that other than look back and realize what would we have done differently, what could we have done differently as an organization. The drug submission, the guy who owned the company was so paranoid. He was concerned that if the law firm they dealt with printed everything and shipped it back to them to take a look at, the truck could break down when it was doing a delivery. He even thought the truck could get hijacked. We're talking, it sounds fun. It's $1 billion on the line. It's amazing. I mean, you think what people do because, you know, he stole my pickup truck. Never mind what people do when there's $1 billion on the line. So the solution, Saturday, it was the first time I've seen, have you seen the American Express or familiar with the American Express Black card? It's by invitation only. American Express says, hey, you spend stupid amounts of money. Here's a card that you can do to buy things like airplanes. Yeah. I've seen 2. And one of them is the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar translation organization and content management organization. And the other one was the guy who was at this company. And it was incredible. we're having a meeting. It's that Saturday to Sunday. It's about 2 a.m. Sunday morning, right? Saturday, we work all day. It's now 2 a.m. The printing is holding us back from getting what we need. We had to put together multiple copies. You know those skids that you see at Costco that they put like washing machines on, etc.? We had 5 skids of paper that we had to print and put together and wrap and ship to the FDA. That was the drug submission. They wanted print copies. They wanted digital copies on DVD. They wanted everything. Yeah, the regulation is nuts. So we're putting it all together, and we realized we're not going to be able to print it fast enough. So I said, send it to the law firm. They have a bunch of Docutext 6180s, 180 pages a minute. He says, nope, not sending it to the printer, not sending it to the lawyers to print. Like, send it to the, he says, no, too risky. So he says, what do we need? So we looked, and we found a couple of 135s, 135 pages per minute, and we realized one of those should be able to do it. He says, what's the chance that it's going to break down on us, that it's going to, you know, something goes wrong? I said, it's low, but it could happen. He says, all right. So then he turns to his IT people. He says, do we have a supplier who can provide those? Well, yeah, we've got so-and-so. He says, all right, I need those machines here now. That it's 2 in the morning. No one's going to be up. He says, fine. First thing in the morning when they get up, before they go to church, I want you to reach out to them. And they sort of looked at him. He's like, buy 3. He hands over his Amex card to them and walks out of the room. They bought 3 of them. They had them there less than a week later and started doing the printing. Everything was set up. They brought them in. We were running all 3 at the same time, and we were able, again, had we not had them, had we only printed on one of them, we were running all 3. We beat the competition after 3 years. We got in Monday. They got in Thursday. That's really effective management. But that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have the stakeholder involvement at the highest level. It would not have happened if he and his team did not have the interaction with the stakeholders who sold computer equipment and were able to get the printers. If he did not have that relationship with American Express, all of that was stakeholder management across the board. And he took it further with risk management and said, we're not going to get 1, we're going to get 3, because if one breaks down, we can run the other. And when we have them, we may as well run them all at once. Why? There's $1 billion on the line. Why? Well, I don't want to send it outside. Even though the law firm has all of the electronic version, he did not want the paper. He went with the trucks to Logan Airport. They booked 15-minute increments for flight departure for 2 days in a row. And I think it was something like $5,000 a pop. So they were paying $20,000 an hour so that if they loaded a plane, they could say go, and within 15 minutes it would be airborne. Those were the types of things they were managing. It was nuts. It was the coolest thing. It was absolutely insane as well. So make sure you know who's impacted, keep them in the loop, and there's more reading that you can do on stakeholder management. It's a massive, massive undertaking, effective stakeholder management. So managed by project management and also by technical communication are all these pieces. The integration is tying together everything, the scope, making sure you control how much, the time, how long, the cost, how many dollars, how many people, how many everything. Quality. Again, set a baseline for what you're going to deliver. All of our illustrations are going to be photos. Well, can't we get 3D pictures drawn by the design team? Not enough time, we're going to do pictures. Later on, maybe we'll put it in. Your clients might not like it, but rather than giving your clients potentially a third of the images, and they're all great 3D rendered images, you can rotate them, etc., you give them 100% of the images. They're just not necessarily at the same standard, and then you can go back and you can fix that for the next release. Now we have more time. HR, making sure you have the right people, making sure that they have the right training. Things like STC help with that as well. Communication, that's what we do. Risk management, identify risks, realistic risks based on where you are. A realistic risk next year, hurricane hitting the Carolinas. That is a realistic risk, and the same with Florida and the same with Texas. Now, the likelihood that all 3 of them get hit, that all 3 get hit with a massive hurricane, a little lower, but it's still something that companies are managing at this point. Walmart, this is a neat one. Walmart at one point had identified that in Florida, at least, I don't know if it was everywhere, when there's a hurricane coming and people batten down the hatches, they buy strawberry Pop-Tarts in record numbers. So what does Walmart do when there's a hurricane coming to Florida? They stock up on strawberry Pop-Tarts and they cut back on other stuff that might be on that shelf. In part, it helps their customers. People can go in and for whatever reason, strawberry, not blueberry, not chocolate, not marshmallow, no, it's strawberry. I guess because it's a healthier choice. It's got strawberries in it. Without, yeah, you lick the frosting off and then you give it to other people. Procurement, going out and actually getting the stuff that you need, whether it's computer hardware, software. We were talking about the versions of FrameMaker. If it turns out that if you procure the most current version of the software in your organization, it takes 6 months to get it approved, and you know that the product's coming, you can start the conversation before it's even released. We did that with one client, with the automotive client I was talking about, because they're doing 500, 600 page documentation. It's all coming from DITA, and we've set everything in motion. They were publishing using FrameMaker 2019 because of the size of the content they were generating before the product was commercially available. We got them onto the beta and they became a test. So Adobe was happy because they were testing large volumes. They were happy because they were able to be involved in the beta test, and their client was happy because at the end of the day, they get PDF and they don't have to shut down their assembly line. That costs them $88,000 a minute. And then stakeholder, getting all of the different people involved start to end, making sure that that gets done. As I said, fewer slides. By the way, this is the second last. Certification in project management is huge. 72% of the project management office leaders feel that certification is relevant for mid-career project managers. So this isn't necessarily for somebody who's starting off. It isn't necessarily for somebody who has 25 years of experience in the industry. Certifications would allow and enable someone to independently be verified for a set of skills. So it's requiring ongoing professional development. Coming to events like this, they get points, they get credits towards certification. Project managers can evolve, enhance, and grow their different skill sets, including whether it's technical skills, leadership skills, digital skills, and this should sound familiar if you're familiar with certification. Technical communications, STC, has certification, and it continues to grow, and it becomes crucial to success. We have several students. I teach at a couple of college programs, and the students, I teach them based on the STC Technical Communications Today book, so that at the end, if they choose to do so, they can go out and get their accreditation through STC. If somebody shows up here in Cleveland looking for a job, and they are from a local university or a college, and they've taken a technical communication program, you have an idea of who they are. You probably have an idea of the school, of the program. Maybe you know somebody who went to it. If somebody shows up here and they say, I'm from Georgian College in Barrie, and I took a technical communication course, you probably have no idea potentially where Barrie is, what Georgian College is, or anything about the curriculum that they have. If they can show up and say, I'm also certified through the STC certification as a technical communicator, it gives you an organization, it gives you a baseline, and that certification is managed outside of STC, but it's still an independent and valued piece when it comes to getting a job. Project management has the exact same thing, PMI certification. My wife is PMP certified, project management professional. She has to maintain a certain number of hours every single year. She has to do a certain number of events, et cetera, et cetera. Again, we do a bunch of stuff around content. Project management gets involved in this in a lot of different ways. I'm doing less of the boring work and a lot more of the interesting and the thoughtful stuff. I have a lot of fun when I'm working with project management, and it gives me the opportunity to go in and find out what are companies doing, how are they doing it, and we're often brought in as part of procurement, and a PM team is looking at it. So having that awareness means that I can pretty quickly go in and say, yeah, here's how we can address each of those 10 categories. It often gets factored into a statement of work or RFP, and being able to talk about it and address it in the language that a project manager wants is fantastic, because now I'm speaking to them in their terms. It's the communication, it's stakeholder management, it's risk management, it's all of the things that they want to hear, and that's what we do. So if you can bring that in, it's another organization or another team within your business that spans multiple parts of the organization. And if they can support you and you support them, it really builds that mesh, that network, so that you're in a stronger position when it comes to arguing for the value that you're doing, because you can get other people on board supporting you.